Some people want to be the very best, like no one ever was. And then there's me. I'm Maggie. I've never played VGC before, and I entered a huge best-of-1 Pokémon tournament in Pokémon Champions. It went about as well as you'd expect.
Bruh.
A little about me. I've been playing Pokémon games since before I knew how to read, but despite watching approximately 14 trillion VGC videos on YouTube, I don't actually play competitive Pokémon. Like, I even attended a regional championship with a friend earlier this season. I didn't compete. I just sort of wandered around like a Victorian child observing industry for the first time. Why? Because VGC is more intimidating than an Incineroar. This is what competitive Pokémon usually feels like to an outsider. Oh, you want a battle? Cool. First, you need to find a team. To get a team, you gotta catch the Pokémon. To catch the Pokémon, you gotta play the games. And the DLC. And the side games. And of course, hunt down obscure encounter conditions under a blood moon on alternating Tuesdays. You know, fun Pokémon stuff. But that's just the start. Then there's the secret wizard knowledge of VGC. You know, breeding, IVs, EVs, which, for the record, are different from these EVs. Then you need TMs, nature mints, performance-enhancing vitamins, egg moves, held items, hypertraining. At a certain point, it starts sounding less like Pokemon and more like a grocery list. And look, I work full-time as a scientist, and I occasionally help run a lively little YouTube channel. Please do not look at my last upload date, although if you did subscribe, statistically I'd feel a bit more guilty about disappearing for months at a time. But yeah, adding team building on top of all of this is just... it's a lot. But Pokémon Champions, it changes things. Instead of spending 6 hours breeding the perfect Basculegion and committing competitive eugenics, I can just recruit him immediately. Finally, a Pokémon game for the terminally lazy. Pokémon Champions lowers the barrier to competitive play from part-time unpaid internship to thing a normal human can realistically do after work. And honestly, that rules. I don't need spreadsheets. I don't need a PhD in egg groups. I don't need to spend my weekend forcing 2 lizards to have a picnic until one of them produces a competitively viable child. I can just think, Fish Ghost seems neat, and then put Fish Ghost on the team. That's beautiful. So now, let me tell you about my experience with Pokémon Champions. The date is April 25th, the perfect date.
Because it's not too hot, not too cold. All you need is a light jacket.
I boot up my Nintendo Switch and download Pokémon Champions for the very first time. Immediately, the game hits me with an announcement. A global challenge tournament is starting in just a few days. As a freshly minted VGC player, who hasn't even played one match yet, there was only one logical response. Oh, this is gonna go terribly. Naturally, I knew I had to sign up. Now, if I was going to bring a team to my very first tournament, there was only one possible centerpiece I could build it around. Your friend and mine, Meganium. I believed in Mega Meganium before it was announced for Legends ZA. History vindicated me, and now I owe it to this dino to bring it onto my team. So, I blazed through the tutorial and immediately blow all my VP on cosmetics. So then I claim a few freebie Pokemon, play a few matches to build up my reserves, and go to recruit a new pal. And immediately, I found my MVP. Look at this cute Pokeball! I originally wanted to hunt for a female Meganium because they're rarer, but as my grandmother used to say, when life gives you sauropods, don't look them in the mouth. She was a bit of a strange woman. I named this fine gentleman Mr. Meganium because he's a stalwart fellow of a mild nature. Oh, no, this won't do. Much better. Mr. Meganium may be my centerpiece, but there's no Meganium in team. So next I needed actual support Pokemon. You know, the functional adults in the room. My first thought was Mr. Meganium would absolutely thrive on a rain team. You see, Mega Meganium gets a unique ability called Mega Soul, which basically gives it permanent sunlight. This means Solar Beam fires instantly with no charge turn, and Weather Ball becomes fire type even when the rain is pouring down. So by pairing this leafy fellow with a Storm Cloud, I can patch up Meganium's annoying fire weakness without losing any of the benefits of Sun, which to me sounded genius. I'm sure real competitive players can probably tell me why building a team around a Meganium isn't a great strategy. And listen, I know, but in my defense, Big dinosaur. So, I decided Mr. Meganium needed a teammate who could make it rain. To set up the rain, the easiest way is to recruit a Pokemon with the Drizzle ability. In Champions, that currently means you have two choices, Pelipper and Politoed. Naturally, I chose Politoed. It's bulky, versatile, has great support moves, and honestly just has the vibe of a Pokemon that files its taxes early. Unfortunately, no matter how many times I checked the recruitment ranch, the frog refused to appear. I refreshed the ranch. I did battles. I refreshed again. Nothing. At one point, I became convinced Politoed could sense desperation. Eventually, though, I encountered Pelipper the Peckish. And look, was this my first choice? No. But neither was Mr. Meganium, and he turned out great. Besides, the title Pelipper the Peckish is incredible. It's a solid pun, sure, but more importantly, there's something deeply trustworthy about a bird whose defining personality trait is hungry. This guy has definitely stolen French fries from children on the beach before, and really, who among us hasn't? Welcome to the team, Pelipper the Peckish. Next, I needed something that hit hard, and this game had a bridge to sell me. Enter Archaludon, or as competitive players apparently call him, Balanced. This Pokemon has appeared in so many VGC videos, I don't even know where to start. Mostly because every time someone explains him to me, I black out halfway through the sentence and wake up hearing phrases like electroshock pressure and stamina value. Bro, I do not know what that value means. This is a dragon made of office buildings. But what I did understand is this. Under rain, Archaludon turns into an orbital weapon. It hits hard. It refuses to die. Sign him up for the team. So my co-host Jay came up with the excellent idea to name an Archaludon Königsberg, after the 7 bridges of Königsberg problem. We flipped a coin for naming rights, and I won, so that's how I ended up with Königsberg the Archaludon. Next on the team was Sinistra, a haunted teacup that, for reasons only known to God, decided to get into competitive sports. Which is honestly kind of inspiring. On paper, Sinistra was a really perfect fit for this team. It's bulky, it provides support, it can redirect attacks, and under rain it gets even more annoying to deal with in the best possible way, which was exactly what I needed, because my overall team strategy at this point was survive long enough for something to accidentally work. I decided to give it the heat-proof ability in order to improve its resistance to fire, a sort of strategy in tea-time psychological warfare. A fire-type might see Sinistra and think it's a free KO, but 5 turns later they're stuck in the rain with a possessed teacup that refuses to die. It seemed a good idea at the time. Now, my team needed a water type to really take advantage of the rain. I knew immediately who I wanted. I knew that they had to be strong. They had to be fast. Look, I really wanted Palafin to work, but I realized she moved with all the urgency of a substitute teacher wheeling in the TV. So I decided to swap her out for Basculegion. Why Basculegion? Well, for one, this fish is fast. Under the rain, this thing hits like it's settling a blood feud.
You killed my father. Prepare to die.
And its signature move, Last Respects, gets stronger every time one of your teammates faints. Which means the worse things are going, the more dangerous this fish becomes. And believe me, things could definitely go real bad, real fast. And at full power, a Basculegion with Last Respects can basically knock out like half the Pokedex. Finally, my team was taking shape. With this lineup, I actually made pretty quick work of the lower ladder, cruising through Pokeball and Great Ball League with only minor adjustments, which was encouraging. Unfortunately, confidence is the natural predator of reality, because the second I hit Ultra Ball League, I immediately realized I had absolutely no business being there. These people were predicting switches, reading my plays, doing math! And here I was, occasionally still clicking moves because they felt right. So it was back to the team building drawing board. First, I realized Pelipper the Peckish was not pulling his weight. I gave him Hurricane, Protect, and Tailwind, the classic support package. Tailwind doubles your team's speed so your Pokemon move first, which is incredibly important when your overall strategy is, please let me do literally anything before dying. The problem was Pelipper himself was dying before he could get the wind going, which is honestly just embarrassing. My friend Jay traded me a Politoed through Pokemon Home, and for a brief, dangerous moment, I considered rebuilding my entire team around Trick Room, a strategy where the slowest Pokemon move first, which sounds less like competitive battling and more like a union accommodation. But before abandoning the bird entirely, I decided to do something truly dangerous. Actual research. And that's when I discovered my EV spreads were all wrong. Did you know that a defensive Pelipper invests EVs into health instead of defense? Because I certainly didn't. Apparently, competitive Pokemon is full of horrifying little revelations like this. You might think, oh, well, I understand numbers. But then a teenager online explains that mathematically, your bird survives longer if you feed it health juice instead of armor juice. Competitive Pokemon has transcended normal human reasoning. I don't have words, y'all. With Pelipper, the Peckish, finally patched up, he really became a genuine cornerstone of the team, which meant it was time to make a few more adjustments so the rest of the squad could survive the horrors of the current metagame. And by metagame, I mean Weather Wars. Once you climb the ladder a bit, you realize Pokémon Champions is basically just regional climate disputes featuring animals. Every match starts with two trainers aggressively trying to decide what season it is. Now, thankfully, my team didn't always need to win the Weather War to win the battle, but I still needed ways to survive it. That's when Mega Meganium really started popping off. Specifically, I gave him Weather Ball, which turns into a fire-type move after Mega Evolving. That helped me deal with Mega Frostlass and other snow setters, while also letting it pair with Pelipper to pressure annoying grass types under the sun. Meanwhile, I felt I had a pretty decent matchup into sand teams with my water types, as well as Königsberg, who conveniently ignores sandstorm damage. However, I did make a few upgrades to Königsberg. First, I replaced Draco Meteor with Dragon Pulse, not because it's stronger, but because I'm emotionally incapable of coping with stat drops and misrolls. I also gave him a Dark type move after an unfortunate counter with Mega, that guy. Yeah, Mega that guy. Mega Alexam. You know the one. Yeah, also this fellow. And with that, it was finally the morning before the tournament, and I was almost ready. Except for two things. First, Pelipper the Peckish needed one last move adjustment. Alongside its final support set, my Pelipper was running Knockoff. At first, I thought this was a great idea. Solid utility move, dark type coverage, checks a few useful boxes. But in practice, Knockoff on Pelipper hit like a damp tissue. So it was time to replace it with literally anything else. I was deciding between Flip Turn to pivot Pelipper out for a free switch, or Muddy Water for spread damage. A simple choice on paper. So naturally, I decided to handle it the way I handle all important decisions. A coin flip. But that morning, something unusual happened. I woke up to a massive rainstorm outside. And I'm not saying I believe in omens, but I am saying the sky looked at me and went, "Pick Muddy Water, idiot." Yeah, so I did. Then I had one last decision to make. I still needed a sixth and final team member. One of my toughest matchups was Mega Charizard Y. Even with my water types and Sinistra's fire resistance, I just couldn't dish out enough damage to keep the lizard under control. And worst of all, Mega Charizard Y sets harsh sunlight when it enters the field, wiping out my rain advantage completely. Not even Basque Legion, with its absurdly powerful wave crash, could reliably keep Charizard in check. At least, not when I was the one piloting it. Honestly, I was probably just playing the matchup wrong. Still, I needed something that could actually threaten Charizard. I briefly considered adding Tyranitar to the team, but I was worried its lack of speed would leave it vulnerable. I needed something fast, something that hit hard, something that looked like it was legally prohibited from entering a Dave & Buster's. What I landed on was Sneasler. Let me tell you about Sneasler. This is a fast little freak with a surprisingly great toolkit. Fake Out to buy time and keep him alive, Dire Claw for solid damage and its ridiculous secondary effects, and Close Combat to check threats like Archaludon and King Gambit. But my coup de grace was Rock Slide. If Rock Slide connected, my hardest matchup suddenly turned into, well, this is pretty much how those games went. It was just chef's kiss. I named my Sneasler Popstar because, as the Amanda file says,
a full-fledged mean girl bully, pop star, a cheerleader. Who is this adult woman? Like this entrepreneur.
And I felt adult woman didn't feel like the right fit for male Sneasler. And with that, my very first Pokemon team had finally reached maturity. It was ready to leave the nest and head out into the world. I named my team You Are My Sunshine, because that's the exact kind of energy Mega Meganium brings on a rainy day. Are they perfect? No. I basically gave 6 Pokemon a shared group project and prayed they wouldn't argue in public. And honestly, that felt like enough. The tournament was next. Tournament Day 1. I decided to set an internal goal for myself. My goal for the tournament was simple: 12 wins. Not because it was optimal, but because it felt achievable. There's 45 matches total, 15 across 3 days. 15 wins would require a 33% win rate, which is basically asking me to become a statistically meaningful contributor of society. And I was not trying to do that. Aim low. Circumscribe your dreams. Still, when I finally queued up my first game, I was unbelievably nervous. This was my first real competitive team. My first actual tournament. I still felt wildly unqualified to be there. I mean, I'd been playing for less than a week. That's not preparation. That's a free trial. Thankfully, I had my emotional support Smoliv nearby.
Thanks, Smoliv. You understand me.
I set up my first match, and I'm facing down a Sneasler and a washing machine. I switch out Königsberg to protect him from Sneasler, and set up Tailwind before losing Pelipper the Peckish to an electric-type attack. I don't have a great answer to my opponent's Sneasler, so I decide to bring in Königsberg and do what I can damage-wise. My opponent switches their Sneasler out for Frigirath, and I manage to chip away at both of their Pokemon and tank a super effective hit on Basculegion. Recognizing the opportunity to get a quick KO on their Frigirath, I select Aqua Tail and... oh, yeah, that didn't work. Frigirath's Armor Tail blocks priority attacks. This is an important lesson. The lesson of Armor Tail is written in blood. I still haven't learned it, honestly. In my anxiety, I neglect to input Königsberg's move in time. Flash Cannon takes down the Frigirath, but the turn is for naught. I'm left with bad type matchups against Sneasler and a Mega Drampa that just set up Calm Mind for free. My Tailwind petered out. My fate was sealed. I lost my first match. Surely, I reasoned, I was just warming up. On to match 2. This one went better, by a certain metric. I started selecting my team and get disconnected. Does this happen to anyone else, or is my internet connection just bad? I lock in my team and I'm against a Dragonite and a Sableye. I hit Tailwind and narrowly avoid hitting my own Pelipper with Dragon Pulse, but Sableye's Light Screen reduces my damage output. I switch in Mr. Meganium and try to get some damage onto Sableye, but my opponent switches in Sinistcha, healing up their Mega Dragonite and resisting Electroshock. Still, I figure a special attack boost on Königsberg is going to be vital here. But then he promptly goes down to a Draco Meteor.
How could this happen to me?
Next turn, I bring out Pelipper the Peckish and go on the offensive with some super effective moves, but my opponent swaps in their Archaludon, resisting my Dazzling Gleam. So my calls here were less than on point. I try to keep Pelipper alive long enough to set up Tailwind again, and attack with Mr. Meganium. Mr. Meganium miraculously survives a Flash Cannon from Archaludon, but Sableye resists damage from the Fairy-type move by eating a berry. Because Pokemon logic! I try to regain control with Pelipper, but at this point I'm on the back foot. My opponent's Archaludon has quite a few defense boosts on board and I have no answer for it. They're also perfectly reading my calls, taking out Pelipper before I can get up Tailwind. At this point, I'm outgunned and outplanned. And then the game disconnects again. Honestly, it's like it's telling me I should have just stayed home at this point. I rejoin the match right in time to see my team go down, and that's a wrap on my second game. I'm on a 2-lose streak. So after these first losses, the game decided to reward me by pairing me with someone 50 kilos higher than me. This time I was facing a team that looked like a normie family accidentally wandered into a Hot Topic. They open with their Sneasler and Basculegion, and I immediately go for Tailwind and switch out Königsberg for Sinistcha. With speed control up, I target Sneasler for super effective damage and a Shadow Ball in case he's carrying a Focus Sash. With Sneasler down, Sinistcha does some chip damage on King Gambit, but goes down to a Katao Cleave. I bring in Popstar to handle King Gambit and decide to target Basculegion with Hurricane, hoping to land a Confusion Reel. It does not happen. My opponent protects their King Gambit and the opposing Basculegion knocks out Popstar, so I bring in Königsberg. I've got a few more turns of Tailwind and Rain left and I need to make them count. I decide to use Muddy Water to hopefully get the KO on Basculegion and target the King Gambit with Electroshot. Again, I'm counting on the special attack boost to get me through. Muddy Water takes out Basculegion and does considerable damage on the King Gambit, who goes down to Electroshot. My opponent brings out Mega Floette. I reset Tailwind and go for Flash Cannon. She outspeeds Pelipper, but faints to Königsberg's offensive. Finally, I manage a win! The rest of day 1 goes on similar. This day was great training for my team, and I started to gain confidence in different contexts with my newest team member, Sneasler. I realized Sneasler's just kind of here for a good time, not for a long time, and you gotta play around that. By the end of day 1, I was able to win my final match for a total of 8 wins out of 15. Barely passing, but D's do get degrees after all. I was over halfway to my goal. More importantly though, I was finally starting to trust the team. I wasn't just pushing buttons anymore. I was pressing buttons with intention. And if you want to push a button, might I suggest the like button down below? Tournament, day 2. Day 2 started at 4 a.m. Not because I'm disciplined. Not because I'm dedicated to the grind. Not because champions wake before dawn. But because I just really wanted Pokemon merch from Target. Target was dropping some exclusive Pokemon products that day, and I really wanted to check them out. And unfortunately, the experience was delightful. This video isn't sponsored, by the way. I tragically make $0 from these videos. But I did wait in line at an ungodly hour, met some really fun people to talk to, got to chat about Pokemon for a while, and I picked up a cool hat to thank Jay for helping me build the team. The cashier even gave me this awesome Charmander pin. And look, Charizard and I have some serious beef throughout this tournament. Mega Charizard Y has personally ruined multiple games for me already. But Charmander? That's my son. That's my sweet little starter baby. Entirely different guy. After the Target excursion, I went home, took a quick nap, and immediately resumed psychological warfare against strangers online. As you can imagine, my notes from this day were a bit disorganized. I was still in a bit of a vague state from my sleep deprivation, but here's a quick rundown. My first match of the day opened with Earthworm, which is already a bad sign. If your opponent starts with Earthworm, you just know nonsense is about to happen. Sure enough, Shed Tail, immediately. And suddenly, there's a horrifying setup sweeper behind a substitute, while I'm sitting there trying to remember if I've ever known peace. Despite this, I squeak out a win, and this starts a shockingly successful day of the tournament. A few key points. On day 2, Popstar was arguably my MVP. I became quite fond of the good old Rock Slide spam. Is this smart? Not really. Rock Slide is only a 90% accurate move, and as the saying goes, if it ain't 100%, it's 50% accuracy. But listen, would I prefer to win through superior strategy? Absolutely. Will I accept winning through divine intervention? Without hesitation. In general, this was a day where my heavy hitters like Popstar, but also Basculegion and Königsberg, really carried the team with tight matchups and good damage rolls. Speaking of Königsberg, I have a note that says, I think Königsberg is small. And looking at my screen grabs, yeah, I think Königsberg might be smaller than the average Archaludon, but that's okay. A lot of people don't mind small Archaludons. As I continued to play, I began to get a nice flow with my matches. When to protect and when to pivot, when to make bold predictions and when to play defensively. Somehow, against all odds, I managed to pull out some victories. And by pull out some victories, I mean Popstar hit Rock Slide and solved another problem through violence. But seriously, as the day went on, I think I started to improve. Not like dramatically, not future world champion improving, but enough that I could feel myself recognizing board states faster. And learning that sometimes the correct play is simply not panicking. At one point, I had a 5-win streak that skyrocketed my ELOs. I checked the rankings and realized I had climbed into the top 10,000 players of the tournament, which genuinely shocked me. Not because 10,000 is like elite or anything. This isn't some world champion storyline moment. But for me, someone entering their first real competitive tournament with a team partially held together by optimism and Rock Slide, this felt incredible. For a brief shining moment, I was up there with people who actually knew what they were doing. Getting there for a little while gave me a huge confidence boost. Like, maybe I actually could hang in competitive Pokemon if I kept learning and improving. And then, naturally, I lost several games afterwards. Balance was restored to the universe. By my last match of the day, my fatigue finally caught up with me, and I was left in quite a pickle. My final opponent had Mega Manectric, Archaludon, and Sinistcha on board. They kept pivoting between their Mega, dropping my attack with Intimidate, and Sinistcha, who would heal the opposing defense-boosted Archaludon every time it switched in. Before my brain could fully process what was happening, my Basculegion was hitting like a damp paper towel. Which was honestly hilarious. Whoever this was, thanks for playing Pokemon with me. Your team was really cool, but also, respectfully, you ruined my day. Jokes aside, by the end of day 2, I landed somewhere around 9 wins. I was thrilled. At this point, I developed a brand new goal. Stay above 1500 ELO. Dream big. Tournament, day 3. By day 3, the exhaustion had fully set in. I was making decisions based less on strategy and more on whatever felt emotionally correct in the moment. Sometimes this worked surprisingly well, but not well enough. I made it to my last 5 matches of the day with 5 wins and 5 losses. I was getting dangerously close to dropping below 1500 ELO. I warmed myself up for my final rounds, took a deep breath, and went to work. Match 1. In match 1, I agonized over who to bring for the full 2 minutes, and settled on a defensive option of starting with Pelipper of the Peckish and Sinistcha. I get up Tailwind while my opponent repositions into Steelix. I fall for their wide guard, but managed to bring Gengar down to Sash. Gengar returns the favor, bringing my Sinistcha down to low HP. I try my luck with Muddy Water again, and against all reason and probability, Pelipper KOs half their team. They bring in Whimsicott and Dragonite. I opt to target the Whimsicott, hoping to avoid them getting speed control with Tailwind, and try to do some chip on the Dragonite before bringing in some heavier hitters in the back. Dragonite protects, and the Prankster ability on Whimsicott ensures it gets Tailwind up before Hurricane can take it down. It's my 3 Pokemon against their 1. Can I manage to not mess this up? I get Tailwind up one final time before Mr. Meganium and Basculegion double up on Mega Dragonite for the win. Teamwork, baby! Match 2. For match 2, I pick my team and immediately forget the cardinal rule of Pelipper the Peckish play. Pelipper needs to set Tailwind. Anything else it does is a bonus. Turn 1, I neglected to keep my Pelipper the Peckish safe from the resident Air Fryer Pokemon, and ended up losing the bird and my speed control with it. Excellent start! I switch in Mr. Meganium and click Protect, hoping to bait my opponent into targeting my Mega Slot while Königsberg chips away at them. Unfortunately, my opponent clicks Earthquake instead, dealing massive damage to my bridge while Königsberg's Dragon-type attacks get softened by a well-timed berry. Gosh, what is with Pokemon and berries?
What secrets do you keep?
Then a heckin' Venusaur enters the field. In my hubris, I convince myself that Mega Meganium can either outspeed the Venusaur or maybe even survive a single Poison-type attack. It could do neither. The match was lost at this point. Popstar is my last Pokemon and it puts up a good fight, but goes down to Venusaur's ground-type coverage. My ELO drops lower. Nature is healing. Match 3. Next match, I learn my lesson and make sure to protect Pelipper so it can get the wind blowing. I fake out the Air Fryer and the opposing Sneasler hits Popstar with close combat, leaving Pelipper the Peckish free to give me some sweet, sweet speed control. I think I'm in the clear. I attack with Pelipper and Popstar, but the opposing Sneasler outspeeds me? In Tailwind? How does that work? So, I had to look this up. What I neglected was the fact that the opposing Sneasler was equipped with Unburden, which doubles its speed when its held item is used up. And its held item was just used up. This oversight allows them to take the KO on Popstar before it can attack. I managed to knock out their Sneasler, but I lose both my Pokemon in the process.
Oh no.
I bring out Basculegion and Mr. Meganium, and my opponent stalls out my Tailwind turn with a double Protect. With just one more turn of Tailwind remaining, I target both their Mons, but they survive my hits on just fractions of HP. They take out my Basculegion and I'm down to my last Pokemon. And Mr. Meganium? This boy puts up a heck of a fight despite the odds, but stood no chance when Mega Delphox entered the battle. I lose the match. At this point, I'm teetering dangerously close to dropping below 1500 ELO. I have 2 matches left. Match 4. I open the next one with Pelipper and Königsberg, and immediately predict the wrong fake-out target from the opposing Kangaskhan. An unfortunate omen.
I'm in danger!
My Basculegion gets paralyzed by the opposing Whimsicott, and, completely forgetting how paralysis alters speed control, I confidently click Flip Turn to pivot out. Instead, my Basculegion politely moves later and takes extra damage for its troubles. Then, Kangaskhan Mega Evolves. At roughly the same moment, I begin experiencing technical difficulties. The game itself no longer wants to participate in this match. My Aqua Jet doesn't do enough damage to take out Kangaskhan, and Basculegion goes down to Throat Chop. I lose Pelipper the Peckish immediately after. I'm down to my last two Mons, who are truly abysmal matchups to the current board state. Their Sneasler takes out all my Pokemon, and then it happens. 1,493 ELO. My dream is dead. Match 5. We're down to the last match of the tournament, and the devastation was real. Was my goal too lofty? Did I fly too close to Meganium's sun? Am I ever going to be adequate at Pokemon? If I have any chance of reaching my tournament goal, I need to win this final match. The match opens. I know my opponent is going to set up Trick Room, so I go full aggro. My Pelipper manages to get some decent damage on Incineroar and an accuracy drop on Frigirath, but Archaludon is incapacitated by Fake Out. I pivot to a more defensive mode, protecting Pelipper and targeting Frigirath, hoping to get the knockout on their main support Mon. The goal is simple: remove the Trick Room engine. Königsberg avoids a Hyper Voice and tanks an attack from Incineroar, and Dark Pulse takes out the Frigirath. Goal 1 complete. They bring out Drampa, and I call back Pelipper to get Mr. Meganium on the field. I target Incineroar, hoping a knockout will keep Mr. Meganium away from the Fire-type damage in subsequent turns. But their Drampa Mega Evolves and takes out Königsberg before my plan can go into action. I send out Basculegion to get a quick KO on Incineroar, and Mr. Meganium gets a super effective hit on Drampa. However, this activates his Berserk, and my Basculegion is brought down to Sash. Worst of all, the Steel-type Archaludon is now looking down my Mr. Meganium. For the next turn, I get greedy and decided I need to attack with Meganium, and make the choice to trade out Basculegion for Pelipper. I need Basculegion's last respects if I'm ever going to take down that Archaludon. Pelipper switches in and avoids a perfectly timed ground-type move from Mega Drampa, and Meganium takes down the Mega. There's not much dignity in outlasting an elderly Pokemon, but I'll take it. The opposing Archaludon returns the favor and KOs Mr. Meganium. I'm left with a 1 HP Basculegion and a Pelipper against a defense-boosted Archaludon. My entire run is at stake, and the rain stops. But then, I see a light in the tunnel. Trick Room has ended. Immediately, I go on the offense. Basculegion uses last respects, but Archaludon survives with 20 HP and gets a second defense boost. Pelipper lets off Muddy Water, a resisted water-type move. The move I agonized about giving Pelipper from the beginning. Will it connect? Will it be enough? Was the omen from the sky correct? Muddy Water connects, and I get the KO. I win my last match and finish the day with just over 1,500 ELO and in the top 85,000 players. And with that, I take a deep breath, treat myself to some news cosmetics, and close up Champions for the day. And that is a wrap on my first ever VGC tournament. Whew, that was a lot. So here are my 3 big takeaways from this experience. First, Pokemon is hard. There are so many interactions to keep track of, and even if you play perfectly, which I certainly didn't, a bad damage roll or a misread can completely derail a game. It's a bit like competitive dice rolling with a memory test stapled on top. Second, I learned that tournament nerves are very real. I've heard of stage fright for actors, the twisties for gymnasts, and tilt for poker players, and this anxiety is definitely at play here. Nothing quite captures the feeling of sitting there trying to remember if you counted for Tailwind, Intimidate, Trick Room, item ranges, whether your opponent is about to pivot or explode your entire game state, the minor things like that. At its worst, your brain feels like it's running 10 tabs too many. Keeping your head straight feels like it's half the game. Relatedly, third, and maybe most importantly, performance doesn't always scale linearly with skill. I had moments where I played pretty well and moments where I absolutely did not, and somehow they coexisted in the same day. That's normal. The gap between I understand what I should do and I can consistently execute it under pressure is basically the entire game. So, I didn't win the tournament. I didn't even come close. But hey, I showed up. I played some real matches, I adapted on the fly, and I think I proved to myself that I can hang in competitive Pokemon, if I keep improving. And honestly, maybe that's reason enough to keep going. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my co-host Jay's own VGC tournament review. It should be going up soon, assuming it hasn't already by the time this video is posted. If it's live, I'll have it linked here. Otherwise, maybe check out this video where I fangirl over Meganium for 5 minutes. See you next tournament!